Hey everyone, my name is Angela Lynn.
And I'm Jesse Lynn, and welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? This week, we're talking about the hottest topic of this week, which is the election. We've talked about the election many times before, but I think this is a particularly interesting inflection point in politics in the sense that personally, I feel there is both a lot of fervor about it, like a lot of polarizing feeling about it, but then also like a good portion of people who are just like me, very tired. Just not even of politics in general, just like very tired of the whole like what is just happening in the world right now situation. So yeah, we thought we would take another episode this year to discuss it because I do feel like it's a very interesting situation that we're in. Also, given just the political candidacy madness, like I don't recall in recent election history where the candidate to be for a party was like, actually, I'm too old and I'm gonna just, pass it off to Mamala to handle.
Girl.
So yeah, it's just been so wild. We thought it would be interesting to discuss again.
Yeah, I mean, it is in a few days. We're airing this literally days before the elections. So, yeah, some of you may have already voted if you did early voting. Wherever you are in your current voting status, it's definitely a relevant topic. I completely agree with you. I feel like I simultaneously feel like it's also chaotic and like I've recently been on a Polititalk like binge and just like watching too much politics, honestly, on TikTok. But at the same time, I feel immense fatigue around it. And I'm like, I need this to be over ASAP because I'm just done. Like, it is so tiring. And it's not just these weeks, but yeah, the entire like climate around the election and determining who is going to be the next president. I'm just like, you know, like I care, but I also am like, please make this stop. And yeah, the Biden thing. I mean, you brought it up already, so we're just going to talk about it.
I
But
mean,
like,
it truly is like farcical because I've largely voted Democrat, but you can hear over the last couple episodes like growing dissatisfaction with the overall party vehicle and the politics that they want to make like the big banner frontline things that they support. But it was truly just farcical because people were like, he's so old. Where are all the other people that we want to like advance through the party that usually start to pop up before the election cycle starts running, which is honestly a couple years. But I was like, what's going on? There's this like collective feeling that the party just kind of like gave up and they're like, well, Joe seems like the safest bet. And I'm like, yes, he is, but he's also very old. And that's going to be a huge problem for many people because they're going to question whether or not he could keep things running because he's so old. Sorry. I'm not trying to be an ageist, but honestly like it's a very high stress job for someone of that age to have, regardless of whatever politics you have.
yeah, for me, it's not actually just his age because he and Trump are actually like around the same age. But if you literally just go by like energy, the energy between those two people, like Trump is fucking old, but he feels young because his energy is like fucking lively versus Biden like from the get-go was like not like the most energetic person, and then as his presidency went on you just saw this like rapid decline. And for me, okay, going back to what you said about just like dissatisfaction with the party, so no matter where you are in the political spectrum, I think a lot of people can agree, and this is part of the kind of like jaded feeling we were talking about. One of the biggest contributing factors to that is that I think a lot of us woke up to the machine behind all of politics, where it's just like, it almost doesn't matter who the person is that is fronting the party because it's really just run by this like massive machine behind the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And they're just like running with the shit they want to run with, which is oftentimes just kind of like rinse and repeat of what they've been doing for a long time. Everyone in the forefront is like often a puppet to some extent. And so that's why, like, for me, when Joe Biden was the candidate, the first time, I remember I said it, I think maybe it was in our episode when we talked about it, but I was like, like, where did he even come from? Like, the entire primary election, he got like no FaceTime. No one gave a shit about him. And then, like, randomly overnight, they're like, everyone endorsed Joe Biden. He's the new Democratic nominee. And I was like, where did all this fervor come from? Because as far as I remember, the entire primary cycle, he had no policy. All he kept repeating is, I'm not Trump, so vote for me if you don't want Trump. And I was like, that is the weakest stance of like all of the political candidates in the primary right now from like when I was watching all that go through. So I remember being like shocked that he became like universally, approved as the next Democratic candidate. And then this time around, like, oh my God, this was just farcical is a good one, but I think for me, it was like, I don't even know the word for it, but it just like really deepened my hatred for the machine because I was like, this is just the most undemocratic way of going about it. Like, first of all, you guys, as the machine of like the Democratic Party plus media, have been lying to us for years about Biden's mental capacity because most of us have seen this rapid decline in his like cognitive ability for a long time. You can see it in interviews. It's not like overnight that suddenly people are like, does he have like dementia of some sort? It's been like a very obvious thing for a long time. But anytime someone brought it up, they were like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. You guys are like, blah, blah, blah. And then when they couldn't hide it because it was in a live debate with Trump, they're like, oh shit, we've been outed. Biden is like obviously has some shit going on with his brain and is like not fit to be president. We can't have him the face anymore. What are we gonna do now? And instead of like, even if we just brush all that off that we've been lied to for fucking years about like the fitness of our sitting president, because he is still our current president, even if we just brush that all aside, if they really said, okay, he's not fit, we need to find a new candidate, shouldn't we have voted on that? Shouldn't there have been like an emergency primary, like re-election for someone like the people actually want? Like, are
Oh,
you
the
fucking kidding me?
primary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, are you fucking kidding me that they were just like, oh, forget democracy. Like, we as the machine just chose for you. We just chose it for you. He didn't die, okay? Like, the vice president becomes the president if, like, literally the president fucking dies or he's, like, in a coma or whatever. He's the sitting president. He's still acting as the president today. There's a bunch of war going around the world that the US is, like, actively involved in. He's still the commander in chief right now, but you are telling me that he is not fit to be the next president and you chose that the VP just gets like this fucking promotion like that without the say of the rest of the country. So anyways, I just went on this rant, but like I don't even see it as farcical. It's like insulting to me as a voter that they didn't even consult the voters about who was going to be the replacement, especially if, because I, again, don't really care where you guys lie on the political spectrum, but like if you do hate Trump, which is what a lot of people hate and are very loud about, if you really do hate him, wouldn't you have wanted a chance to like pick someone you thought was going to be the strongest contender against him versus the machine just picking for you, just the person who was there? So anyway, so I have so many qualms around like the way that Kamala became the stand-in candidate alone. And this is just like, I think that's also what like got me on Polititalk was like, I was really tuned out. Like, I think when you and I wrote this outline, Biden was still the candidate. It was like
Yes.
pre-Kamala. Yeah. And we were both like just so jaded and just like whatevs. And I was not following politics at all. And then when Kamala became the stand-in, I was like, this is bullshit that they just like parachuted in a replacement. And then that's when I started going on this like fucking black hole of just like endlessly scrolling TikTok.
Yeah, and my understanding of the whole like delegation primary process is that is technically the voters, but it's always like a subset of the voters, and like to be present in a primary is actually pretty challenging. Like you actually, I think you physically have to be there in some instances. So it's like it's really like the only people who are gonna be able to go is a very select part of the population, which I don't know necessarily like fully represents what the total voter base looks like. More and more, what we're all saying is that the two-party system just doesn't work because there's so many people gathered under this umbrella of conservatism and this umbrella of liberalism that it just does not make sense because the middle part that it's trying to represent is like this horrible average that like doesn't work for anybody really. And I would rather that they like push the umbrella on that and like break a couple of things than to just stay where everything is. And I just want to say, like, it's not just a rag on Joe Biden fest. Like, he's a I guess, career politician that has done very many good things. And like being on a debate stage at that age, I think is really challenging. So it's not to say like he's completely unfit to be the president, because there are some situations where I think it's harder to really think on your feet and perform. But it's also kind of just like at some point we gotta like find some kind of like person to represent what I feel like the next generation of people are interested in and can bring some kind of like energizing feeling into the political process again. And I just feel like that has like kind of come and gone in waves, because there have been so many, I don't want to say like false starts, because there are like been many people who have kind of like risen that like political star and they have like done good things, but it's like not enough, to your point, to like push the system anywhere to really make holistic change. So it's like kind of a bit of a struggle, because it's like, what do we do? Like, do we wait for that person to come up through the party? Like, that doesn't seem very likely. Do we try to like find someone and like vote them through local politics and like support them through that? That seems like a really long slog. So it just leaves you in this position where you feel kind of like, well, I'm gonna vote the party line because like it's kind of like poison pill, as you mentioned, for a lot of people, but it's not really exactly like what I would like to do if I were given some more choices.
Yeah, so actually, I was not going to vote for Biden. I was going to vote for RFK Jr., who was running as an independent and would have been this third party thing that you were talking about. I know a lot of people are going to hear that and be like, because there's a lot of controversy around him because he was very early on deemed an anti vaxxer. So once you get a label like that, you're fucking canceled. But actually, he had a very strong movement behind him. And it was another reason that I went down the Polititalk, like just hole, is that watching his entire campaign, he got a lot of support actually. And you wouldn't know it because mainstream media forcibly omitted him from everything. They even omitted him from the presidential debate because they were like, oh, well, he's not a real nominee. And it was like, at that point, neither Trump nor Biden had been declared the official nominees of either party. So it was like based on technical rules of like political debate, he should have been included, but they excluded him. Anyways, he was being sued by the Democratic Party machine in every state to have him removed from the ballot because they were so afraid of his like potential to pull voters away from Biden because he is more of this like middle ground. He originally ran as Democrat, but because there was just all this like fucking shit going on with the machine, he left the Democratic Party and re-engaged as an independent. And so they were really afraid that he was going to pull too much from Biden. So they literally wasted all of his campaign funds that he got through all this time. So he would have to fight lawsuits in every state to stay on the ballot. That was another big reason for me that I became like even more jaded with the political machine. For a party that's supposed to be like liberal and like open-minded about stuff, you seem like you're actually pretty like totalitarian, that you're so afraid of a third party candidate potentially bringing a fresh perspective on things and potentially pulling voters away from you, that instead of just running a good fucking race and having a strong candidate with strong policy, you are destroying the chances of an independent movement from becoming a real thing. And another reason I am disappointed is that even after he said that he was going to withdraw from the election, he originally said something that was hopeful because if you guys have listened to many of our episodes, we previously covered the Taiwanese election, which, like, to be fair, neither of us are living in Taiwan and we didn't vote in that election, but we did spend quite a bit of time talking about that third party that got just so much of the voting percentage. They got like, a quarter or whatever of all popular vote, which is like insane. And so I was really inspired by that because originally when RFK withdrew, he said, if we get enough people to vote for me, 5% of the popular vote, he would have been able to establish an independent party as like a permanent party that is already on the ballot, that he wouldn't have had to fight to be on the ballot for all these states. So in the future, him or somebody else running as independent would have been able to just like be on the ballot like that. Unfortunately, he kind of turned back on that initial stance. Okay, he said a kind of controversial thing. He was going to remove himself from all swing states, but for all other states, all non-swing states, he was going to stay on the ballot so that if you still wanted to vote for him, you could put your ticket in, because it wasn't going to like change the vote anyway of that state, but at the same time, it would have the ability to establish this independent party. Unfortunately, after he announced that, a bunch of states forcibly kept him on the ballot so that it would take votes away from like both, but like they were hoping more like Trump, because he was saying he was endorsing Trump from like a banner statement. I'm endorsing Trump, but I'm staying on the ballot for like the non-swing states because it doesn't matter who you vote for in those states, is like his original stance. And so those states chose to keep him on the ballot to take votes away from Trump. And so then because of that, he changed his stance altogether and he was like, okay, just vote for Trump, because he can't control what the states are going to do with the ballots. But now he's like fully endorsed Trump. And I don't really know how to feel about that because, but whatever. Anyways, he's probably going to be part of the Trump administration from a health standpoint, like FDA standpoint, which I think is very strong because that's actually his background. Lawsuits against like Monsanto and like all these big ass companies that are poisoning our food and health systems. So there's some potential silver lining. But anyways, another like sideways rant, which is like, I originally was going to vote for him and I was hoping for an independent party, and that's like not going to happen. So I don't know, whatever. It's all just like whatevs.
Yeah, I feel like it's really challenging because there's just this like deep-seated feeling of distrust, and I still feel like there's a lot of alienation where it's like each side feels like there's more on each side, each person voting feels like there's kind of like a moral superiority to everything. But I just feel like that's because of how TV based our politics is. It's like so popularity contest driven. It just feels like you'll do anything to win, but then at the end of the day, like nobody really wins. So like for this episode, I was like, let's see what everyone is saying on their candidate websites. And it's just a whole lot of blah. Like everybody says the same thing. They're like, I'm gonna save the environment, I'm gonna transform the economy, I'm gonna make more jobs, I'm blah 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 blah. I'm like, okay, these are all great positions. How are you gonna do that? How? Because everybody is saying that. So like if you guys are all representing yourselves as the same person doing the same things, well, it's kind of like it cannot be true. And I just feel like there's a certain level of like integrity that's missing from a lot of the candidates and like the party vehicle in and of itself. Cause I'm like, it's not just about winning. Like, yes, you want to win, but like it means something to have a position on something and like be real and fair about how you run a political campaign and support candidates and such. And it's hard because I say that and then immediately I'm like, well, that's just not the reality. Like you kind of have to be really down and dirty to win. But it just sucks. It sucks that our system rewards that and it doesn't reward parties, candidates, people who are really working to try to make a difference and like really have a conviction in what they're doing, and instead just kind of rewards this like news cycle insanity situation, which I'm just like, it's just so disappointing to see like every 4 years.
You've heard me complain about how weird it is to be an American-born Mandarin speaker because I grew up speaking Mandarin at home and have a passing native accent, but simultaneously sound like a child when trying to talk about real things. Since I realized no one out there was catering to people like us and decided, I'm just going to do it myself. I teamed up with my native Taiwanese Mandarin language teacher to create Real You Mandarin, a self-paced online Mandarin course built specifically for ABCs and ABTs. All of our content is video-based, realistic dialogues centered on topics you'd actually want to talk about, from dating and pop culture to media representation and growing up as a minority in a majority society. You'll learn the relevant vocabulary in the context you actually use them and be able to practice them daily with pre-built digital flashcards. You'll also be able to practice speaking by shadowing, repeating back, or following along with all of these dialogues to practice speaking at natural speed with the right pronunciations. Check out the course at realumandarin.com and get 10% off using promo code WhereAreYouFrom10 10. Let us help you express the real you when you speak Mandarin. Hey listeners, wondering how you can support us? The biggest way is by increasing our visibility by following us on Instagram at Where Are You From Pod, on TikTok at But Where Are You Really From, subscribing to our YouTube channel under But Where Are You Really From Podcast, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, and telling your friends. The more people we can get to listen to the show, the more we can continue spotlighting different perspectives and stories. And if you feel so inclined, we're also accepting donations at buymeacoffee.com/whereareyoufrom. Thanks y'all.
Yeah. TBH, the reason why I've been down the talk more than anything else is because I don't trust the I don't trust the mainstream media anymore. Like it's so obvious the slant that each side has on their reporting that I'm just like over it. So a lot of times like I like watching if there's something that's like there's on the ground stuff. So for example, the North Carolina shit that has gone down, like with the hurricane, I don't believe anything the news says. That was another hole I went down, was like all the people who actually live in the affected area and who've been posting like what is actually happening and the federal response that they've received or not received and how they're rebuilding. And honestly, it's mostly grassroots efforts, and it's a lot of like veterans who live in the area or surrounding areas. It's a lot of like local National Guard, like from other states that are being pulled in, but like federal response is like lackluster, to say the least. Yeah, anyways, so I don't believe mainstream media on a lot of things anymore because there's a bias of like the way they want to report a lot of things that may or may not be the actual truth. And so, yeah, I definitely agree on like, I'm really tired of like the news cycle. And also we wrote this in our outline originally, but like the memes, right? I'm fucking tired of it. Like,
the memes are the best part. Don't you come after the memes.
girl, the first full half of Kamala's campaign was just memes. She had nothing. She had nothing but her memes. I was so over it. I'm like, when are we going to hear what you're actually going to do? But to your point of like the websites, right? Like, I agree. Most political websites are just fluff. Like, it's just like, okay.
It's the same reason why I don't follow any of the debates, because it's always like, well, my position is that's great. My asshole is also this. Like,
I
I
think
don't
there's
care.
something different though. The unique thing about this current election is that both people have been in office before. To your point of like a promise is just a promise versus what actually gets done. The interesting thing about this election is that there is actual like proof of what they've done respectively, right, in office. And so I think for me, looking at that is a little bit more substantial because like you can promise anything, but what did they actually do? A lot of my kind of like decisioning around it is going to be focused on that as well, not so much the fluff. Because also like some of the things sound good that they say they're going to do, but it's also like, but how? But how?
Yeah, I mean, but I was also like struggling with that. I was like, well, like Kamala as VP, I guess you could really only just look at, technically VP is a senator, right? So you can like look at sponsored legislation, like stuff that she put to the floor. And then for Trump, I was like executive orders, because it's like you don't really write laws as the president. Like I guess you could lean on the legislative branch in your party to write certain laws, but like they don't put forth laws. Those are like, for me, the closest thing to like direct action that person is interested in actually like pushing through.
I guess if you're going to pinpoint it directly to like one individual person, but they are responsible for their entire 4 years, right? Like their respective 4 years. Not Kamala specifically, I guess, even though her name is the second fucking name. I feel like a lot of people try to like wave off like she was only vice president. It's like, okay, are you going to pretend like the vice president is like not an important person because it's like
No,
the second
yeah.
in command?
No, but it's more just like, what is it that they can actually influence in terms of like legislation?
Well, they were in
stuff
charge
like...
of different things. And so, for example, like one of the things the right is obsessed with is like Kamala's track record with the border because she was in charge of the border crisis. And you can make your own assessment of how well she's done with that. But the president assigns the VP to like be in charge of specific things. Like Pence was in charge of a lot of like the COVID response stuff, wasn't he? So anyways, they do stuff besides like vote on legislation. They have many other responsibilities. But I think in general, it's more like, how is the state of the country? under the, under
Oh, I
each
see. Yeah, yeah,
administration.
yeah.
Not just the country, because actually something that I'm very, very concerned with is the state of the world right now. You started with that in the
Yeah,
beginning, but
sure.
not from like a concern standpoint. You're just like fucking tired, right? But like I'm concerned. I'm
Yeah.
concerned. At that point, when it's like US versus other governments, there's no such thing as Democrats versus Republicans. It's the United States government versus like another country's government. It doesn't really matter which party is the running the administration. It's on behalf of the entire nation. I'm more concerned with who is the commander in chief. Like I feel like people really downplay the role of the president in that sense. They are literally in charge of our entire military. And I think we've taken that for granted because we have relatively, and I'm probably gonna get blowback because we were in Afghanistan for like fucking 20 years, but we've been in like quote unquote relative like stability in the US, right? Like we haven't had anyone invade us, and Afghanistan was bad, but it's not like it wasn't Vietnam where there was like a draft, that like half the nation had to be like sent off to war or whatever. So I think war right in your face of something you have to think about has not been the case for a very long time for most Americans, unless you have someone in the military who was in Afghanistan or anything related to that war. And so I think a lot of people take for granted that the president is literally the commander in chief. For me, in thinking about these two people, like I don't like either of them as humans per se. Like, and I'm gonna get probably blowback because a lot of people like love Kamala. I've never loved Kamala. Like when she got the VP pick, I was like, why? Why? She was so weak in the primaries when she was running as president herself. But whatever. Anyways, I'm concerned with who becomes that person because on the one end, Trump is like volatile, right? Like he has a huge personality, a big ego. His whole thing when he was president was kind of like scary to me because I was like, we are at peace, but at the same time, every time you meet with a world leader, I'm like, are they going to declare war right now? Because your like interactions are so bizarre. So I couldn't tell if we're like on the brink of war with North Korea, with Russia, with all these places, or if we're like chill. And turns out we were chill when in retrospect, but it seemed very like chaotic. Versus with Kamala, I'm sorry, but you need to have an amount of fear as a leader, as a world leader, and nobody has fear towards her. Putin literally said in an interview, he laughed when interviewed about like the person was like, who's your pick for the US president? And he was like, Biden was my favorite before, but Kamala, yeah, Miss Harris is definitely my favorite. That's fucking bad when Putin wants a specific person to be the president because he views that person as weak. So I'm very afraid of Kamala becoming the president, if only because I really do not think she commands respect from an international stance. And she's part of the current administration. So when Biden said don't to Iran, and then literally they did, and we've done nothing in response to that, it shows off as weak. And so I'm really afraid that her as a continuation of the current administration, because she wants to pretend like she's something new, she's the current vice president. She's just getting a promotion if she does become the president. It's the same administration because she doesn't really have like brand new, like innovative, totally different from Biden ideas. So a continuation of the current administration that is not respected on the international scene with the number of on the brink of war or already in war, but like potentially could all become like blowing up in our faces in our borders. Like I'm very concerned with her being the next president for that reason alone.
It's funny because I almost see it in the opposite way, which is that Biden and Kamala are more left-leaning, but they have leaned more right when it comes to the position on Middle East, which is like very focused on deterring Iran and like Muslim countries and very focused on supporting Israel. And I actually think like it's a little bit of a sore spot for a lot of people. I think because of the social and interpersonal connections that some people have to the struggle that is happening in that region, it is a little bit like a weird position for a more liberal candidate to have. I wanted to touch on like the war piece because I feel like it isn't something that a lot of people think about, but I feel like it should be more pressing. I think what has happened in my opinion, I'm not a political analyst, like in my opinion, the war has happened for so long. As you mentioned, we were in Afghanistan for 2 decades and had very little to show for it. And we continue to have this like weird, like, yes, we are kind of military pressure there, but no, we are not like actively getting involved. That is kind of built into this almost like boy who cried wolf situation where it's untenable for any candidate anymore because the countries there that felt like our presence has been a suppression are like, yeah, we don't believe you're going to do anything and we don't believe anything is going to change. So like we're going to push all of the buttons and we don't think that you're going to commit anything else because look at what has happened. And so I feel like part of the issue is that it needs to be more pressing for a lot of people. It needs to be in the news for more people. Like people need to see the horror that is happening over there and be like, holy shit, like we are, if not complicit, like we're involved in that just by having troops in the region and having been like a force that was trying to stabilize the region, but then kind of left and we're like, JK, like, here's this like thing we did back to everybody there. I think it's actually more important that people see all of that. And it's like, I don't know. Now it's like out of scope from the election conversation.
Is it? I don't think it
Okay,
is.
it's
I don't think
not,
it
but
is.
I think it just goes to show how navel gazing our like political process. It's like watching reality TV. It's so divorced a little bit from like what is actually happening when you watch some of the things that they talk about. I'm like, I don't care about like half the things that you guys are talking about. What about all these other things that are like real problems that my generation and people who are coming after me will have to deal with? I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. I don't, yeah.
I will just add, like, yes to everything you said, but just to add more gravity to the situation, it is not just the Middle East. That is what I'm saying, though, is like we're literally on the cusp of being directly involved in so many fucking wars. Like the Ukraine war, we have already funded so much into the Ukraine Russia situation. There have been some troops, but like literally money and weapons, like we are involved already, right? But like in terms of it potentially affecting us more from like a troops standpoint, and also China, just in general, like the weaker we look because we've been really weak in our responses to a lot of different foreign pressures. The weaker we look, the more likely China also is to be like, oh, this is the time. This is the time, y'all, for the Taiwan thing that we've been talking about for fucking forever. The US has always been the only thing standing in their way. And so the weakest point we are is going to be when they decide like this is it. We're literally at a turning point of so many different corners of the planet right now in terms of like US foreign relations that I'm just very concerned if we have another weak leader in charge of our fucking military, which is the only thing anyone's still afraid of from the US because our economy has gone to shit. So it's not like the dollar is like our saving grace anymore anyway.
I don't even think anyone's really afraid of the army. I mean, like we haven't really truly deployed that in any meaningful way. So
Well, we have the biggest military industrial complex, right? Of like
yeah,
every
that's true.
fucking country on the planet. From just that alone, that is what I mean by like
Yeah.
what people are afraid of, like military strength, which is the number of people, the amount of money we have invested in that. It's like we've talked about it. It's probably way more than should be, but like from a relative to any other country standpoint, we're like the big guns people. So
Well, on that note, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode on this year's election politics. My hope is that things will shake out and kind of go back to a state of normalcy. But I will say that, again, underneath all of that, I still feel very strongly that everybody, like most people, want the same things in terms of like what they want the government to help them with. And I think there still is a lot more things that connect us as people than the politics talk track would suggest. So I'm hopeful that that continued bridge and understanding will be what transforms how politics works in the future.
agreed. Bring back the people part of all this, y'all. Like, I wish the people were just at the forefront instead of all the reality show part, as you kept referring to it all.
Well, anyways, listeners, let us know. Let us know. We would love to hear what your hopes are for the election, hopes are for our future political system. Drop a note in the comments below or wherever you're listening.
Or come back in a few days after the election results come out and just bomb our comments with whatever you want. Oh god. And yeah, with that, come back next week because we'll have another fresh episode for you then. And until then,
再见
再见
bitches.
bitches.